Professor Ed Copeland is a man who just loves solving equations. Ed's a theoretical physicist at the University of Nottingham, a man I've been making videos with for well over a decade. Now, his bread and butter is cosmology, string theory, the early universe, all that good stuff. But in his heart of hearts, Ed loves numbers, mathematics, neatly jotting equations on pieces of paper. You've seen him in some Numberphile videos doing just that. Today, he's going to tell us about his journey from schoolboy with dreams of playing cricket for England and how doing high school mathematics helped him through a health scare later in life. But first, we talked about Ed's childhood in the Yorkshire town of Huddersfield. What's Huddersfield famous for?
The Industrial Revolution. That was one of the starting places for the Industrial Revolution. Let's see, in terms of if you're a rugby fan, rugby league, not rugby union, rugby league began in Huddersfield at the George Hotel.
I did not know that.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that where the rules were drawn up?
That's where the rules were drawn up, yep, at the George Hotel. And then, of course, I suppose then you've got people like Harold Wilson, who was the Prime Minister, was born in Huddersfield. James Mason, famous actor, was born in Huddersfield. I used to run, going to school, I used to run through his mum's garden to get to school, did a shortcut.
Okay.
Yeah.
What were you like as a little boy? What was your childhood like?
Oh, very happy. Very happy childhood. I would just be playing out with friends out, and my parents moved into an estate, a new estate that was being built. So it was still being built when they moved into the house. So as I grew up, when I was 4 or 5, I started playing out on the estate that was still being built.
What, amongst all the bulldozers?
Yeah, which is not a great idea, right? And in fact, there is a story of me. So I'd be climbing up scaffolding, where in the houses that were being built, I'd be climbing up the scaffolding. And there was one day I climbed up and I slipped, but the scaffolding went up my jumper. Yeah. And came out, and I'm just I'm dangling there. And they had to go and get my dad to come and I wasn't in the good.
You were
I wasn't in the good books then.
No, I bet you wish you'd fallen off the house after that.
But we used to play football, a lot of football, and then there's a big motorway goes near where I live called the M62. When I was growing up, they were building it, but they had to blow it out of the ground. I mean, so if you've been on the M62, it's blown into the ground. So it's like a valley. Mm. And so we'd get a 10-minute warning. You'd hear it like a siren going, and you had to close all your windows, and they'd explode. There'd be explosions, and then we'd shoot off. We'd go looking for where they'd done the explosions, and be going down into the valley partly to go across to another field where there was an even better football field we could play on.
It sounds like you spent your childhood on construction sites.
I was a naughty boy as a child. I've learnt my lesson. I mean, when I was 3, me and Gary Bradley went down the local postman. In fact, the man who owned the local post office, he saw us on the main road on our tricycles, and he came out and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "We're going to Huddersfield," which is 4 miles that away, and we were 3 years old.
It sounds like we could do this whole podcast on your childhood.
Yeah, it was
misdeeds.
It had its breaking into houses and all sorts of things.
As you got a little bit older, but were still a kid, did you have nerdy interests? Were you already on the path to becoming a cosmologist, physicist, or were you did you want to be a footballer?
Oh, I wanted to be a footballer, but yeah, I was. I think I was thinking about it the other day, and when I was at primary school, so that's the school you go to when you're 5 or so, I remember the teacher giving me and someone called Paul Flynn extra cards which had sums on them. So we'd obviously, I just remember receiving these. The teacher would sort of rather exasperately hand them out to us and go and do this, go and do this. And so I think I probably was quite keen, or I could do a bit of sums then, whereas the rest of the class of 5, 6 year olds were doing whatever was in the book. Clearly Paul and I had done this, and we were onto the special cards. So I don't remember having it as thinking I want to do numbers, or as a real youngster, but I clearly had some ability, because I do remember getting these cards to do. Yeah. And
as you moved through primary school, start of high school, what did you want to be when you grow up?
Well, still footballer, but I quickly realised, when I was 8, I got into the first team, the school, my junior school's team.
Yeah.
And which were for 11-year-olds. So I was doing pretty well. I was in
at
when
football.
I was at football. So I was doing pretty well. And then when in my final year at primary school, junior school, when I was about 10 or 11, I scored 31 goals. And my dad had said to me at the beginning of the season, he said, I'll give you 5p for every goal you score. And the first game, I scored 7 goals. and he came back, he said, we're not doing that anymore. But I clearly loved football. And then I went on to secondary school and I got in the team again, but it soon became clear that there were some really good players there who were being selected for the town. So that to me was the way that you saw it. You could see that they were being asked to go for trials. I had a friend called Chris Sherlock and he played for the town. And I thought, yeah, you are much better than I am. So that was the end of my footballing career. But then cricket took over, and I hadn't really appreciated cricket. And at school, I started playing cricket, and we had quite a good team, and we were quite good. We got into the final of the Lord Taverners, it was called, the regional final, the Yorkshire final. And the winners of that were the Yorkshire winners, and then they would play other county winners, and you'd end up at Lords. The actual final was at Lords.
Which is, for Americans, is kind of like the most famous cricket ground in the world, home of cricket.
It's the home of cricket. So we reached the final, and we played a school called Ampleforth College, which is a very famous public school, or if you're in America, a private school. It's the grounds, I remember coming across the top of a hill and just seeing everything in front of us, and our teacher turning around to us and saying, "This is all owned by Ampleforth." And it had a massive effect on us. We just sort of felt, oh, we've had it. Thinking, and we played really poorly and lost in the final.
But you didn't get to go on and play at Lords?
Didn't go to play on Lords. But I did go then to trials with Yorkshire when I was 14.
So this is as a 14-year-old, this is a chance to represent the county, which is a big area.
Like the area of the state. I mean, it's the equivalent of that.
And Yorkshire is a real cricket county too, so it's a big deal.
It was a big one. And so I played... I didn't get in the final Yorkshire team, but in the trials, we were playing outside and it started raining. So we went inside to the nets, and in the nets, there was 2 nets there. One had a spin bowler and I was a batter, and one I was facing the fast bowler.
A nets is a bit like a batting cage in baseball.
Exactly that. Exactly, yes. I started hitting the fast bowler, and everyone was over on the scouts, all the members of the Yorkshire board that were selectors. The selectors were over on watching the spinners, and then they just gradually started coming over. And
look at this kid.
Yeah, he's hitting, and it turned out the guy I was hitting played for Yorkshire in the end,
right?
And it was the best I've ever done. It was probably the highlight, me hitting this guy.
Yeah.
And I played a few days later for Huddersfield against a local, another town called Halifax. And about 3 of them came to watch. But I played I opened the batting. I was the number 1 batter, and I opened it. And I got 14 or 15 runs before I was out. But it took me 14 or 15 overs.
Right, slow batting.
Slow, sure batting.
Right.
And they weren't interested in that.
They wanted someone a bit brisker.
They wanted someone that was doing what they were doing in the nets, and I wish I had have had that.
I love how you remember how many goals you scored and how many runs you scored.
Yeah, maybe the number thing.
I'm like that with my 14-year-old accomplishments in sport. They're seared in my memory.
It's the highlight, right?
So presumably you were eventually coming to a realisation you aren't going to be a professional sportsman. Yeah. I hope you have come to that realisation now.
I've sadly come to that, yeah.
What was plan B?
I guess when I think back, I wasn't really thinking about it until 16 or 17, seriously. And then by then I knew I was better at maths and physics and the sciences than I was in the arts. My English essays were adequate. They were passing exams, but I wasn't setting the world on fire.
What did your parents do?
Oh, my mum and dad had... my mum was she was from Ireland, and she was born on a farm, and her education ended when she was 13. She had to go back onto the farm. She was born in 1933, so being a woman in Ireland, you didn't have much of a chance of higher education. But she was good at maths, it turned out. I remember she sadly passed away now, but I remember her telling me that they realised at the school she was at when she was about 13 that she did have a gift for maths, so they put her in a maths class and instead of doing the needlework class. So, I tell people I walked around for the rest of my life with holes in my clothes, but I could do a bit of maths. So I'd like to think, even though she had no formal education beyond 13, that
She just had a natural ability.
She had a natural ability. My dad was born in 28, so as with many people from working class backgrounds, he lived in London in Bow. His dad was a joiner. His education was decimated by the war, so he ended up going. When he was 11, he went over to Ireland, evacuated from London, where he stayed for 5 years. It was a very difficult time because he was in an area of Ireland where there was a lot of anger at the English, shall we say. So he took the brunt of that at the school. So he then came back and became a joiner. He trained to be a joiner. So his formal education ended sort of when he was 13 as well. And you do a lot of practical maths when you're a joiner or a carpenter. So he was very practical with the maths. And the key thing for me with them was how supportive they were. They knew they wanted me to get an education. It was the thing that they wanted above all. And in particular with Dad, in the 1960s and 70s, if you were working on a building site and it was raining, so you couldn't work, that was it. You got no pay. And if you were ill, that was it. You got no pay. And I remember him, he slipped and fell through a roof twice. So he was badly injured. And I remember sitting on his knee. Every evening he'd come home and I'd sit on his knee and we'd read the paper together. That was a way of me learning how to read, I suppose. And I remember one day him saying, for goodness sake, get an education. Do not end up in a profession where you're relying on the weather to be paid or not. And it sort of, I enjoyed doing maths and things anyway, but that kind of led me to think, this is what I need to do.
It's interesting. Sometimes you would hear stories from children of working class parents who just say, you don't be bothering with this education. You've got to get out there and earn money. Yeah. And you get this opposite end of the spectrum where they're like, don't do what I'm doing.
It was exactly that. It was almost a plead. Don't end up doing what I'm doing. And I've got, the other thing he did, both him and my mum drove home to me, was respect everybody, respect all professions. It wasn't that he wasn't respecting the profession. Without builders, and he helped build the M1, right? And all the bridges that you go under on the M1 around Birmingham, he did them, and he did all the shuttering on them and stuff. But he also knew that there was other things you could do which were just as important. And just from a practical standpoint, he said you don't want to be having to rely on, and it's very hard work, these jobs. You easily get injured on them.
Towards the end of high school, it sounds like you're excelling in mathematics
I'm doing all
physics.
right in maths and physics, and chemistry. The chemistry teacher wanted me to go and do that at at degree level. But it was a toss-up for me between maths and physics. I really love maths, and I was okay at physics. But there was something about math. I remember hearing about Fermat's last theorem. I think that sounds really easy. Why can they not do it? And so I went to the library. I was about 14 here.
I turned to this guy called Wiles who was sitting next to me and said,
I've got an idea. Have you heard of a modular form, Andrew? No, I've never heard of that. Well, try that. So I went, and I remember thinking, well, I'll do it by a thing I'd just learnt at school, which I noticed recently you did a Numberphile on induction, proof by induction. Surely you can do it by proof by induction. You can't.
Well, maybe you can.
And I haven't.
You can't fit it in a margin.
Yes. But I just had I would go to school. I guess a sign of how much I really enjoyed just doing maths was I'd read Scientific American, but I'd always go first to the Martin Gardner section, and then I ended up buying the Martin Gardner books, and I'd go to school and I'd be trying to do the puzzles of Martin Gardner whilst I'm sitting on the bus, and because I had to get 2 buses to get to school, so
right.
Yeah,
you weren't riding a tricycle down.
I wasn't riding. No, those days had gone. Even that, I'd realised that was not a good idea.
Okay.
So yeah.
Just a quick break to say, if you're listening to this podcast, you may be interested in career paths, maybe your own career. Well, today's episode sponsor is Jane Street. They're a research-based trading firm with offices all around the world, and they have a hunch that the sort of people who listen to Numberphile might be interested in a career with them, solving puzzles, cracking problems, all in an exciting, international, big-stakes environment. You could find yourself living in New York, London, perhaps Hong Kong. I know of a few brainy Australians who've actually made the trip over to Hong Kong to join Jane Street, actually. Very exciting place to work, amazing city. Now, if you go to their website, that's janestreet.com, and click on the really obvious tab called Join Jane Street, You'll find everything you need to know. They've got jobs listed there, internships, outreach programs they run, stuff about what it's like to work there. Any question you've got will be answered there on the webpage. janestreet.com. Check them out. And our thanks to them for supporting this podcast. Now, back to our interview with Ed. And with a cricket career looking unlikely, what does he do at the end of high school?
Right, so I had this tough decision to make, maths or physics, and actually it was with, my dad said, I guess the working class, that you've got to have a career at the end of this. I guess he couldn't see a career as such in math.
He saw physics as a bit more applied.
Yeah, he did. And in fact, he
didn't know you were going to become a cosmologist.
No, that's right. That's right. Although, when I did my PhD, and I was telling him about my first project that I was doing, which was trying to find the entropy of black holes. It was trying to, what happens if you drop something into a black hole? How does the entropy change? And he went and told all of his mates in the pub, my son's working with black holes. And he told me, he said, look, you just tell me where they are and I'll fill them in with bricks for you. That was it. So he had sort of felt that I should probably, just for the sake of a career, make sure I go and get something that's, do a subject that's clearly got prospects at the end. And in fact, he wanted me to try and get a summer internship type thing, get sponsored and then get sponsored through university. So I actually applied unsuccessfully to the Atomic Energy Authority to work, one of their reactors over the summer, with the idea that they'd then sponsor me through university. But that sort of then geared me towards the physics. So I ended up applying to do physics, and I applied to Oxford and King's and Imperial, Loughborough, and I ended up going to King's. Oxford, I wasn't ready for Oxford. You do an entrance exam in those, I don't know if you still, I think you still do, but I did it in what is called the lower sixth. That's the year before you finish. So I did it early, and I remember looking at these questions saying, I don't know what these are. I can't do this. I can't do that. And I went for an interview and they said, how do you think you did? And I said, I don't think I did that well. I was struggling on them. He said, you were all right, but you weren't great. And I'm thinking, no, that's me done. And indeed, it was me done. But I got from Oxford, the most precious thing I've got is the letter which they sent to say you've not got in. Because I'm no ordinary person that hasn't got in, Brady. You're not talking to any old reject here. I am an A-class reject.
What does that mean?
I don't know, but that's what I am. I have the letter.
The letter says you're an A-class?
I'm an A-class reject.
Does that mean you were really close?
Yeah, it meant I was really close. I mean, which didn't help.
So every time you win a medal or get some big grant, you get that letter out and think, could have been you, Oxford.
It could have been you. Yes, I'm an A-class reject from there. And then I went to interview at Imperial and King's. And
not shabby universities.
No, they were fine universities.
Yeah.
And Imperial, I went on the Tuesday, and King's on the Tuesday, Imperial on the Wednesday. King's I went and they said, well, we only take 25 people. So this is late 70s. Well, now they'd closed a department that only took 25 people, but they said, we take 25, you'll do what they called special physics. That was their degree, special physics. And I really liked it. I liked the people that they said, we of course have only taken 25, we get to know you all very well. And that was true. That made a big difference. The next day I went to Imperial. They said, here's a notice board. And it was this big notice board. And they said, there's 250 people on there. That's our regular intake. And so it was clear there was a decision to be made. Do you go for this world-class place that takes hundreds and hundreds, or do you go to this other place, which I thought was actually had some great physicists in there as well? And it did, which only took 25. So I went local.
Boutique.
I went boutique, yes. In fact, King's is in a fantastic location. I mean, it transformed my life. I don't know if you know where King's is. It's on the Strand. Right. It's you must know where it is. It's by Australia House.
Oh yes, I know where Australia House is.
Yeah, so it's right by Australia House, and but in particular that means it's by Waterloo Bridge. So you go across Waterloo Bridge and you're at the South Bank. So I'd never been to theatre, so I started going to theatre. You could get student standby tickets, and you get them on the morning. And I saw Amadeus, the play, the first performances of Amadeus. Wow. I saw, and by getting they held tickets back in the morning, so I'd come in at 7 in the morning. I started going to the Royal Shakespeare Company, which is in the Aldwych, which was 2 minutes walk. So what I'd do is I'd just go up to the library and work till 7 and then go across the bridge. And
so from a kid who was playing in the rubble of the motorway, you're now going to see all the highfalutin theatre.
Yeah. Actually, you talk about, there is one thing I had seen a lot of in Huddersfield. You said, what's Huddersfield famous for? It's the Choral Society is a very famous, Huddersfield Choral Society is very famous. So we'd gone to see Messiah a few times there.
How did you find university physics? What was the step up like, and the step up in the mathematics you were doing?
It scared the hell out of me. The first maths class we were taught maths with engineering, and I've got palpitations. So the guy, there was 300 of us there. It was a massive theatre, and he starts explaining, and this letter I keeps appearing. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, what's this? I'd never come across complex imaginary number.
Yeah, you didn't do that at high school?
No, I'd never done it. Never come across it. Right. Square root of -1. So I just turned to this person who I didn't know. I said, what is that? He says, square root of -1. And he sort of gives me this strange look. And I'm thinking, this is lecture 1. And so... What
else don't I know?
What else? And so in fact, what I did was I felt traumatized by this. This is the first maths class I've been into, and I've got 3 years of this. I've just got no chance. But what I did, it was a Wednesday afternoon, and I walked down the Strand, because about 20 minutes down the Strand is the National Gallery. And I just walked around the National Gallery, and it just calmed me down. I just looked at these beautiful paintings in the National Gallery, and it calmed me down. And I said, well, okay, you're at university to learn. Start learning. So I bought all the maths books, which I'd been asked to buy. It cost a small fortune, but I'd bought them. And so I turned to the chapter, which had an imaginary number in complex numbers. And so it was hard. I mean, I found it hard work. I wasn't someone that it was all just coming natural to, and I didn't have to bother with the homework. I could just sort it out. I was working hard, but I did. I was a hard worker. That's my mum and dad sort of got that into me to, put the hours in and it'll pay off. And that's what I did. So the physics came, then eventually the maths came easier than the physics, because I was good at maths. It's just I hadn't come across this thing. But once I came across it and came across the idea of complex numbers, I was bowled over by it, and then I was away. I just started enjoying it. And the physics was more challenging. I mean, the physics, you've not only got to do the maths, you've got to be able to understand what you're applying it to, the concepts you're applying it to. And a lot of early university physics, the first year or two, it's things like thermodynamics and classical mechanics. It's the bread and butter of a physics degree, and so you're just applying things to situations which you might not be that familiar with. Most of us never think about what's called a Carnot cycle, the efficiency of a heat engine, unless you're building a fridge or an air pump. But you have to learn all of these things, and you've got the maths, which is hard enough, and then you're trying to make sure you understand the physics aspects. So you've got this double whammy with physics. Whereas with the maths, I could just enjoy playing with the numbers and learning it. But when I first arrived, I thought I'm going to struggle here, right? Because my A levels had been okay, but most of the 25 that were in had got straight A's on everything, and I hadn't. But I did it. The thing that turned the corner for me when I realized, actually, I can do this, I'll be okay, was you call them mid-sessionals, halfway through the term, halfway through the year, you have a set of exams to just see how you're doing. And I did pretty well in those exams. And by then I'd got to know a few people, so of course you're comparing how you're doing, and I was doing fine. And so I thought, okay, I'm having to work hard, but I'm actually doing all right.
You felt like you belonged?
Yeah, I felt I belonged. And I'd found the football team. I'd got into the King's football team.
Of course.
And had met a couple of people that were similar to me. They liked the academic side. One guy is now a professor of chemistry at Oxford. And so that meant, I felt really part of it. And in the summer, I got in the cricket team. And so, I felt...
Started thinking, change your career again. It's not too late.
Not with the football. I wasn't that... I just hung in there.
At what point do you start being exposed to the things I associate with you now? Cosmology, early universe, string theory, all this crazy stuff?
Not string theory at this point, but cosmology. In my third year, not until my third year, there was a course where I had there are these inspirational teachers you're lucky enough to get through your life. At King's, there was one called John Martin. In the year before, he taught quantum mechanics to me, and I absolutely loved it. I just loved all of this uncertainty that was inherent in it, and just solving, Schrodinger's equations and things for different potentials and different configurations. And then he went on the following year. He taught a course on general relativity. It was the first time he'd taught it, so he was doing it in his own way. And at the end of the course, there's a progression that you can take into cosmology. You can use general relativity to sort of develop at a basic level the cosmology. And that was my first entry into it at the end of my third year. And at the same time, I was having another set of lectures on statistical mechanics, which is kind of the atomic understanding of heat, thermodynamics at the level of the atom. And this was a fantastic course that was being taught by another person. And I was wondering, I knew about quantum mechanics. I'd done statistical mechanics. I'd done cosmology. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm really enjoying this. Was the highlight so far of my degree. I was really just loving learning this complicated stuff, and it was blowing me away every time. And I thought, that's the first time what can I do? Where can I go? How can I carry on? And I don't think I really understood about PhDs at this point. So I began to talk to various lecturers, and they said, well, you could go and do a PhD. And so I went and looked up where I thought I could do this combination of these. And the place that I stumbled across was Newcastle, where there was a very famous physicist who'd moved there from King's, actually, from the maths department, called Paul Davies, who's still very active. Many of your listeners will know about Paul Davies. He's one of the best writers of science communicated, certainly one of the best science communicators, and he's been doing it since the 70s, writing these fantastic textbooks. He was doing a subject called quantum field theory in curve space. So you had the quantum, and the quantum field theory was bringing in sort of statistical mechanics as well, and then curve space was bringing in the general relativity. And I knew nothing about it. It's a whole topic, this, and I knew nothing about it, but I thought, I could see it was bringing these things together. So I applied, and he invited me up for interview. And so I went, and in those days you couldn't Google anything, right? We're talking 1982. So I went up to the library and I hunted. There were these big books you could get where you could find out what people had published. And I found his publications, and I found a review he'd written, and I got from the library, got the review, and I'm looking at it and frantically taking notes so that when I went for the interview, I was able to say, well, I've been reading your review and I've learned a little bit about this.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
I think it just showed keenness.
Yeah.
Certainly what I tell potential students when they're going for interview, find out about the group you're going to have an interview with, find out what they do, and show that you're interested in what they're doing.
So you aced the interview then?
I aced the interview, and I got it, and so then I got my degree, and I've been one of these on this production line, right? I've not stopped. So I'm now 1922, I'm 21. So I then go up to Newcastle.
That almost seems brave to me, Ed. Like that. You're going and applying to study something that you don't even know anything about.
Yeah.
Like it's a topic you've never even heard of. Is it brave or desperate because you want a job? Like you want the PhD? Or is it brave?
I think it was brave in that I felt it somewhere inside me that this was what I wanted to do. You're right, I didn't really understand it. But I knew that at a very superficial level at university, I'd been studying these three topics.
It's like someone told you we've invented a new sport that combines football and cricket. And you're like, I've never seen it, but I want to play it.
I want to be part of that.
Yeah.
And so, you're right. There's a bit of, not quite desperation, but it's true. I only applied for 2 PhD places, one at King's to do statistical mechanics, which they're very famous for, and one at Newcastle. And so I was very lucky in that sense. I had thought if that doesn't work, it's the Met Office for me, because we'd had a...
This is the weather.
The weather.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And we'd had a colloquium from someone from the UK Met Office, the weather people, and it's all differential equations. I mean, that's complicated differential equations. It's all chaos, right? It's chaotic.
You could have been a weatherman.
Yeah, I could have been there with Michael Fish and the likes. But I knew I wanted to do the quantum field theory stuff and learn about it. So I went up and I started, and I had my first meeting with Paul Davies. And in my subject, there's a very famous, in cosmology, there's a very famous vacuum, where you've no particles. it's got a name. It's called the Bunch-Davis vacuum. Davis is Paul Davis. And I'd never heard of this vacuum. I didn't know anything about where it would play any role in life. But Paul said, well, okay, my last 2 PhD students, he said, they're just here. And he turned around and he pulled a thesis out from me. He says, this was my previous student, and he handed it to me, and it was Bunch. It was Bunch's PhD thesis. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, no idea. And he said, and the current one, the one that's just finished is here. And he turned and pulled a book out, which is called Quantum Field Theory in Curved Space. It is the book of quantum fields in curved space. It's by Birrell and Davis, his other student. And he said, what I suggest you do is you just start reading Birrell and Davis and then come back and see me. And it was one of those feelings again of, do I just leave at this point? Or do I, these are these last 2 PhD students. One has produced one of the main vacuum in inflationary cosmology that everyone has to talk about, and the other has produced the definitive textbook on the subject.
Right. What's left?
What's left? So, being naive and not really understanding can be useful. So I went off and I started learning. I had to do it, a lot of it myself. Newcastle was a very small group Paul had. So there was no MSc courses and no detailed PhD programs, which many, certainly in the US, many universities have. So it's once again where that self-discipline has to kick in, right? I didn't know what quantum field theory was. I have to go and find out. So I went to the library, found books, and I must have spent 6 months, 7 months, just reading textbooks, not even trying to read papers at this point, making sure I tried to understand calculations. And then eventually Paul said, well, we had tried one project, the thing I told about on black holes, which wasn't panning out. And he said, well, let's try. His great thing was a thing called particle detectors, which is the idea of if it's a detector that can detect particles. And if you move it through a given space-time, what would it pick up? What sort of radiation would it pick up? Would it be a thermal radiation, like a black body spectrum? Would it have some particular distribution that wasn't that? Depends on the space-time. And you can do the calculations thanks to Birrell and Davis. So he suggested a topic, which was to have a detector going in a space-time, which was just a cylinder, just a 2-dimensional space-time. The space was just a circle and time was a vertical. So it's a cylinder, right? And it would go up as if you're going up a spiral staircase on a cylinder. And that'd be and I had to work out what would a detector see in this. Would it see any radiation or anything? And I remember doing the calculations, and I reached this stage where I ended up with this huge sum, and I'm thinking, well, I can't do anything with this. And then I looked at it, different approaches, maybe 3 weeks I was spending on it. And then one day I'm looking, and I had it written out again, and I thought, I've got this first term and I've got this second term, but the second term cancels the penultimate term. And the third term cancels the one before that. And all of a sudden, it was this big, long expression boiled down to 2, which was just the first and the last terms. And that was one of the happiest moments I recall.
A breakthrough.
A breakthrough. And it was a trivial thing if I'd have written it out. But that's what research is like. You can bang your head against the wall, and then all of a sudden something really trivial will pop up and allow you to then progress. And
you seem to spend a lot of your research time with just a pen and paper, old school.
It's the majority of my time,
And a lot of other academics I speak to talk about sitting at computers and writing code and like that, but you seem to be very old school, and you'll just you do it incredibly neatly, by the way. You've got the neatest notes of anyone I've ever seen, but you like actually just that tactile.
I do, I love it. And I'm happy to write pages and pages. Is probably not the most efficient thing to do, where you've got a big long expression and you try and simplify it, and then the next expression is still really long, and each time you're just trying to simplify it down. So
but you'll write them out longhand?
I will write them out longhand, yeah. And the only thing that's changed recently is, I guess, with iPads and using something like Notability on an iPad, you can now do this wonderful thing where you can cut and paste. You can sort of copy a bit and put it down and then just edit that little bit. So it quickens it. The downside of that is if you've made a mistake up there, it progresses all the way through. But I do use things like Mathematica a lot, but that's going to be at the level where I've ended up with an expression where I don't think there's much more I can do just on pen and paper, perhaps I'm having to try and solve a differential equation or something, or if there's an integral. But even then, I'd first of all try and go to one of these classic textbooks of integrals and Gradstein and Reisig and tables of functions, Abramovich and Stegen. So yeah,
you got your PhD at Newcastle.
I did it. So I worked. So I did this project with Paul.
Were you as great as those previous two?
No, not quite. I don't think so. But yeah, I did okay. I did okay to the extent that I did this first project with Paul. And as I said, Paul was a great communicator. And at that time, he was really busy writing books. In fact, he wrote a book whilst I was doing a PhD with him called God and the New Physics. And from that, he won the Templeton Prize. So it's at that level that Paul was, and he went off to write the book in the Lake District, which is a beautiful part of Britain, of course, but it meant I couldn't communicate with him. But I had a feeling I didn't want to spend my time doing this particle detector. And we all have breaks in life, things that go well, we're lucky. And my first meeting that I went in my second year at university, and it was to a Royal Society meeting called On Fundamental Constants of Nature. And it was just a who's who of people. I mean, it was Stephen Hawking, it was Stephen Weinberg, it was Martin Rees. It was just this list of people. And that was the meeting where Hawking said that we'll solve everything by the end of the century, because he thought there was this subject called n=8 supergravity. It was all going to work out, and there was only one little missing bit, which was understanding the cosmological constant, which was never understood. But there was another. Weinberg gave a talk, and well, he's just an inspiration anyway. But he gave a talk, and in the talk, he started telling us about an idea of extra dimensions, Kaluza-Klein theories, and that it's such a beautiful idea that these original ideas of Kaluza and Klein was that the forces of nature that we see, the four forces, electromagnetism, the weak force, the strong force, and gravity, we kind of think of them as separate objects right now. But a goal of theoretical physics is often to unify. And the idea is as you go to higher energies, maybe these forces become manifestations of the same force. And in particular, maybe eventually it's just gravity. And a way that was done is by saying the four dimensions of space and time that we see today, maybe we live in a universe that's got more than four dimensions. These are Kaluza-Klein theories. And in that higher space, everything is just gravity. It's just the curvature of the space. But when you then look at it as a four-dimensional universe, those extra dimensions manifest themselves as these forces. That's the beautiful idea. And Weinberg had, with another brilliant mathematician called Philip Candelis, who's at Oxford, had come up with a way of looking at these theories and making them quantum. And I thought, this is phenomenal. I need to learn about this. And then my next bit of luck was that Newcastle hired someone called David Toms, who was working in the subject. And I began working with David. And so the bulk of my PhD was this. And from that, I actually got an offer to work with Weinberg. Unfortunately, the pound collapsed, as it's doing again. Yeah. And it really collapsed. It went down to $1 a pound. And I was being paid in pounds. So I was going to get paid about $9,000. And I thought, I can't live in Texas on $9,000. And so I ended up going to Imperial, where I hadn't gone as an undergraduate. They'd made me an offer.
This is after your PhD?
After my PhD. I went to do a postdoc at Imperial. That's where I met Tom Kibble. Right. First time. But I'd really been hired by, they have a very brilliant group of people who work on string theory and on Kaluza-Klein models. They had people like Mike Duff and Chris Pope and Kelly Stell, and they made me an offer and I went there. But I actually didn't work anymore on Kaluza-Klein theories. I got there and I started hearing about these weird and wonderful things called cosmic strings. And so I was seduced by cosmic strings. And I started, that was one of the things I began to work on there with Tom and Neil Churo. It is interesting, so how your career path you are influenced by people. And I mean, maybe Weinberg isn't. Weinberg's one of those he was the influencer, right? There are those people, of course, that drive everything. And in my eyes, Kibble is like a Weinberg. I mean, I think he should have got the Nobel Prize, as you know.
Yes. He passed away now, so he can't get it, but he very easily could have got one by the sounds of it.
Yeah. And just listening to him, and then Neil also, who's a good friend of mine and now in Edinburgh, is at the Perimeter as well, is very enthusiastic supporter of, at the time, of cosmic strings, and I ended up sharing an office with Neil, and so his enthusiasm rubbed off on me, and we ended up doing a project within a few weeks together.
What are you now? What do I call you? Are you a cosmologist, a theoretical physicist? What do you like? What do you call yourself?
I tend to. It depends on the audience that I'm talking. I call myself more a theoretical physicist because I like to work on a broad range of topics, some of which will be directly related to cosmology. But you see, cosmology means different things to different people. I think those of us who work on very early universe, more speculative ideas, whether they're coming from string theory, string cosmology, or inflation, I think the hardcore numerical simulators, for example, and observers that are looking at the larger scales of the universe, they don't think of us particularly as cosmologists.
No. They
would say they are the cosmologists, whereas they might put the word early universe in front of it for us. But basically I'm doing quantum field theory, and so I'm a theoretical physicist, really. I apply it to gravity.
Without going into the details of this physics that I couldn't possibly understand, I can never quite understand how your job works from the research. I understand you teach, you do some teaching as well, obviously, but like research-wise, do you just lie in bed and think, maybe this is how the universe works, and then what do you do next? Because you can't test it. You know?
Yeah, no, it's very hard to test, and that's, in fact, there's been quite a debate recently, about string theory, right, and testing string theory, and I love string theory, and I love trying to think about it, but it is hard to test a theory that is really its action is at very high energy scales, and we can't reach those energy scales. So what can you do? I don't tend to think. I'll come back to that, but I don't tend to think on quite such a grandiose scale of solving some big problem. But it'll be more of the case of what do I know about? I know about scalar fields. I know about, because I've worked on inflation, I've worked on Higgs theories, I've worked on cosmic strings. These all use these things called scalar fields, and I know what many of their general properties can be. And so, one approach I've taken is, say with the dark energy, which has been a big part of my career since about 1998, when it was first sort of realized that something was driving the acceleration of the universe. I knew very early on that it is possible to use these scalar fields to do that because of a thing called inflation. That inflation is an acceleration of the universe. In the very early universe, it's just much, much faster rate of expansion than we see today. So I knew that there was this possibility. So my approach then was to say, can I make use of that type of model to explain what is going on today? And that led me into what we call dynamical dark energy. So it was a slow process. I began with the idea of, we've got these scalar fields. Let's just see whether or not we can have them so that they're not dominating the universe early on, but dominating late on. And I was asking myself the question, what would I have to do for that to occur? And that then led me to kind of build up. It's all in the potential energy for if you want the details. What sort of potentials would happen, and then having established that it could do, then say what would be the observational consequences? Could we see that?
So it's sort of like you're moving the sliders around and seeing whether or not it still works, or does the universe break?
It's precisely that, and then also coming in, you're moving the sliders around, but there's also these buffers, and these buffers are observations, right? These buffers are things that
reality checks.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm always hitting the buffers. That's the problem. Always seem to be very close to the buffers anyway, so that you're moving a parameter of the model, changing some variable so that it can fit, but you find that by doing it, it's then leading your new universe that you're creating to violate something else on some other energy scale, maybe, usually to do with the cosmic microwave background, which is so tightly constrained. So it is that balance that you're trying to find the path through. And of course, but I have to accept, I don't know what the underlying theory is. I do not know what nature has provided as the underlying theory, and I'm sort of playing around with various models.
So this is what it sounds like to me. Tell me if I'm wrong. You're twiddling a bunch of dials, all these different dials, and finding out what configuration of dials would match what we observe in the universe. And if you can get all the dials on the right numbers and it matches what we see in the universe, you may have figured out how the universe works, but then maybe someone could come to you and say, well, that's nice, Ed, but I've got some bad news for you. That dial doesn't actually exist.
I'd agree with you up to the point of me saying you've found out how the universe works. It's always a model that you're dealing with. What you'd then be trying to do is understand. So what you would then do with, say, that type of, you'd say, what are the characteristics of this model that's allowed it to work? Can I embed that in what you would hope is a more fundamental theory, like a string theory, which is, or another theory of quantum gravity? That's where I would go. That's where I do go. I then try and say, given that, does it fit in to a more fundamental underlying theory?
Like, do the dials exist?
Which then means, do the dials exist? Yeah, if it doesn't fit into that theory, then at least coming out of that theory, those dials don't exist. Letting parameters vary is like turning a dial. It's exactly that. This is what they're doing, for example, you may have heard, when they're doing searching for the axion as a dark matter particle, they're literally turning a dial. In their case, it's a dial which can tune into different frequencies. But what they're effectively testing is different parameters on the axion model by seeing these frequencies corresponding to changing these parameters. And if it was to pick up a signal, then it's telling you something about what that value of that parameter is.
How advanced mathematics do you have to use? Like, would mathematicians look at what you're doing and think, oh, that's child's play, or is it quite advanced math?
No, they'd say it's child's play for a proper mathematician, right? I have tried reading proper mathematics papers, and I can't read them. No, I'm doing the mathematics I'm doing is good, I think. I hope it's good. I'm solving some complicated systems, and then I'm using approaches which are quite demanding. I'm quite often, in fact, in almost all the systems that I look at, you can't solve them exactly. You need some approximation schemes. And so you're having to develop either perturbative schemes or some schemes which allow you to figure out what's the main contribution to something. These are quite complicated mathematics and well-known techniques, but they're not at the level of dealing with some of the pure mathematics that you see having to go into solving some of the prime number conjectures, for example.
How do you come up with new ideas? Have you got a thing you do? Do you like to go for a walk in the woods or have a shower? Or
we've just been doing interviews, and that was the question that we asked, actually. How do you decide on what project to work on? That was a question we asked, and it's really hard. In fact, as we were asking, I'm thinking, what do I do? I think it's a combination of things. Sometimes, like I said, when I went to Imperial and I got talking to Neil and Tom, and I just got bowled over by this idea. At the time, as it happens with the cosmic strings, it really looked like they could be telling us something about the distribution of large-scale structure. And yet there was so little known about their dynamics. And so I think deep down, I think that's just made me realize, I think deep down, I like to see an equation that I can solve. I love maths. I love solving equations. And I like to be able to hang the maths onto some physics. But I love to see what the actual underlying equations are. And if I like the look of it, I will often just go for it. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to try and solve how the universe is behaving at the moment. I just love solving equations. So I think the beauty of the maths often grabs me. That certainly did with things like the strings, and it has done with all the early universe things I do. It's not usually the case that I hear of an observation and I think I want to explain that observation. I don't work like that.
You won't see some new picture from the JWST and think, I'm going to come up with what I wait.
No. I'm not as brave, I think, as that, or as foolhardy, perhaps, to sort of say, right, I'm clearly going to have to totally rethink this and let's just try this total new thing. No, I tend to stick more closely to the areas that I've been working in. I've been working here long enough now that there's quite a few of those areas. So there's always interesting things to think about. And given that there's these areas that I'm interested in within those areas, I think it's true. I'm just thinking on my feet, sitting here right now, wondering about it. I think it really is the elegance of the equations that grab me. I love to solve an equation.
What do you do when you have like a block though? Have you got like just in your personal life, if you're not having, the ideas aren't flowing or something, have you got like a thing you do?
Well, one of the beauties of being a lecturer is you have to do other things. You've no choice. And I love teaching. I love communicating science, and I do it in teaching as well. I do silly things in the teaching, in lockdown where everyone's had to go and do videos. Well, I brought teddies into my videos, so there was an audience there, and I talked to the teddies, and and that worked. We just had graduation a few weeks ago here, and the number of students that came up and said how much they enjoyed that interaction that I was having with teddies.
So were the teddies on camera or behind the camera?
No, they were on camera.
So you were like talking to them in front of the camera?
Yeah.
Like,
so I had
they must have thought you were bonkers.
Yeah, exactly. I had the best one was I had a different teddy for each of the lectures.
Were you calling them like Ted Ed, or what were you calling them?
Yeah, they all had names. The horsey, yeah, they all had names. And then for the final lecture of the it was a mechanics course. For the final lecture, I brought them all in, right. And so I set up a little lecture theatre, and they were all there. No, but I'd make use of them to actually bring across a point. I'd turn to them and say, "What was that? Is the Hamiltonian conserved in this system? That's a good point." And,
right.
and so it would just, it was a way of breaking. But it relates to you. What do you do when you're a bit stuck? You've got to teach,
right?
And so sometimes I put huge effort into the teaching side, or, we have to do our administrative roles. I'm head of outreach here for a while, and so you do that. So those things you have to do, but some people only have one project on at a time, maybe two projects. I imagine Andrew Wiles had that one project, right? I think he did, 7 years. I can't do that. I've got maybe 4 or 5 things, so I will flip between them. I don't like working by myself very much. I have done it. I love collaborating with people, so I love the chance to be able to interact with. So if there's a block somewhere, I will quite often go and think about something else. Either I might be teaching, or I'll go and think about another project. I mean, we do go for walks, of course we do, but I don't tend to think that I'm going to go for a walk now to clear my head and sort this out.
Do you ever worry, like, you're not an old man, but you're also not as young as you once were. Do you ever worry you're running out of time and you want to discover more stuff and find out more stuff? And you talk about having all these different projects on the go, plus you got to teach, plus you got to that, and do you ever think, oh no, I want more time, I want to do more stuff? I
have entered the period where I think I want to enjoy it. What I'm doing, I really want to enjoy. And so it hasn't gone that way where I feel I need to do more and more and more. But I have thought, you've got to be more selective. One of the downsides of doing lots of projects is you can ask yourself, how selective are you being on when you say to someone, yeah, that'd be fun to work on. So I've definitely moved into a thing which is sort of recognizing the finiteness of how long you've got left, of what you're going to work on. Yeah, so rather than saying, no, I'm running out of time, I've got to do this big thing, it's more, I've got to make sure I enjoy it.
Does enjoying it mean picking the right topics or picking the right people?
Both. Both. Definitely picking the right people to work with. I mean, one of the things I like most about being here is that, when I came here, it was a major consideration when we were making appointments, is would we get on? Would there be a group here where people felt they enjoyed each other's company? And I think it works really well when that happens. It fosters a feeling of trust and of collaboration, and it's a nice environment to be in.
Do you wish? I'm thinking back to that fork in the road where you chose between physics and mathematics, and your dad said, go physics. Do you ever wonder what the maths?
Yeah, I do. Like? I do. I've often wondered what would have happened, and I fear I wouldn't have been good enough. I don't know. Of course I don't know. And I know that I work very hard. So I probably would have been okay. I have a feeling I did the right thing in that I think I'm doing pretty good things in the area of cosmology that I work in. I hope I am anyway. And making inroads. I have a feeling that if I had decided, I'd have been doing prime numbers. That was the only thing I really cared about.
Yeah.
I have a feeling I would have been someone churning away, not being anywhere near being able to do the prime conjecture, twin prime conjecture or anything like that, or Riemann, which of course is the big holy grail. But I don't know. But I do often think back, and it's out of the videos, the Numberphile video. Absolutely, I always go if I see that you've done a Numberphile. Well, I always watch the Numberphile videos, but I've been in some of them, and if I see you've done one on Prime, I'm straight like that.
You're like the Prime number ones. You're not the Lone Ranger there.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. Maths has played a big role in my life, and in ways which I wasn't expecting. So around 2009, my dad. Well, early 2000s, my mum sadly got Alzheimer's, and she had to live with Alzheimer's and passed away in 2013. But my dad was looking after my mum until about 2009, when he himself was feeling unwell. And then it turned out because he was a builder, he'd worked all of his life on building sites. In the 1950s and 60s, asbestos was used all the time. He was cutting up asbestos. He was sweeping it up, particularly in sweeping it up at the end of the day. And it turned out he'd got a thing called mesothelioma, which is a very, very nasty cancer of the lining of the lungs. He stayed with us at home for the last 6 months, and in 2009, and then my mum was in a care home. And he was in a lot of pain, and we were really struggling to get the pain relief sorted out. And anyway, we did eventually, and it was as happy as those situations can be. He was really pleased to be with us, and we were delighted to have him, and he could go and see my mum, and so could I. And then a few years later, so he passed away in 2009, and now we're about 2012, and my daughter's about to do her A-levels. So here comes the maths.
This is the high school.
She's at high school, yes. So this is the degree. These are the exams you do, which if you pass these exams, you go into university.
Big deal for kids.
They're a huge deal. Yeah. And so she was doing maths and further maths, it's called. So 2 maths courses. And something really weird started happening to me. I began to feel a pain in my lungs. And it was at the precise spot where my dad said he had been receiving this pain. And it is the most bizarre mental thing that you're going through, because you're thinking, this can't be right. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm absolutely fine. But of course, I'm thinking back to my dad, because we lived with it, and this huge problem and the pain that he was having. And I'm feeling it, and I'm thinking, and I'm moving, thinking it'll go, and I'd move and it'd go, but then I'd feel it again. And so eventually it had quite an impact on me. I found myself unable to concentrate. I'd come to work. I'd be coming to work and I wouldn't be able to concentrate. I'd be kind of looking out for it at this point. And the thing that eventually kind of started working for me was Hannah, my daughter, said, would I help with some of the maths? And so I literally spent hours, and I wasn't doing it for her, really. I mean, I wasn't in there.
Sort of tutoring her and helping her with her.
But the level of tutoring I went through every maths problem. Yeah. She didn't want them. She'd done them. She was very smart. She ended up at Cambridge. She got straight A stars. She didn't need me. I needed her and that maths.
Yeah.
I was doing them, and they were taking up. That was what I was able to concentrate on. Just sort of thinking about, partly because I felt I was probably helping her on some occasions. I was, but also it was just something I was familiar with and I could do, and
cathartic.
And I ended up, whilst I was doing this, sort of eventually I told Natalie, my wife, who you know, and she said, look, I'm absolutely sure you're fine, but why don't you go to the GP? And I went to the GP.
Oh, difficult. You haven't gone to the GP yet.
No,
typical man.
Typical man. No, not man.
Yorkshireman.
Yeah. So I went, and the GP said, I'm absolutely sure you're fine, but I can see you're concerned. Let's send you off for an X-ray. So I went off to the local hospital. This is 2012. It's the Olympic year. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I went so that's relevant. I went to the hospital, did an X-ray, and then I'm putting my shirt back on, and they said, would you just come back in? And, I'm going, oh my God, they've seen something and they just want to, and they said, you've got really long lungs. And I'm saying, oh yeah, right. You're just being kind to me. And so I went back in, and they moved it slightly and took another picture, and they said, that's it.
So the first one, they hadn't got your whole lung because it was long.
That's what it turned out to be. Yeah, they genuinely hadn't got it all.
Yeah.
But I didn't believe that.
Right.
In my head.
Yeah, of course.
They'd seen it, right? They'd definitely seen it. It was there, and they were just homing in. And then I went through the most bizarre sort of justification of timeline that I've ever done. I couldn't literally go back to the car because, as I said, it was the Olympic year, and if you remember, during the Olympic year, the torch goes through the towns of the host country.
The torch relay,
and it happened to be Newark's today.
Right.
And they'd shut the road off, which allowed me to go across to the car park. So I had to come out of the hospital and just wait. And I had to wait for an hour.
For this convoy
to go, where there were very happy people waiting for the torch with some local celebrity running along with the torch. And I'm going in my head, okay, they've not contacted me for 10 minutes. So now they've not contacted me for 20. So I'm, okay, gradually convincing myself I was all right. And then by the time I was released to go, I'd convinced myself, and which must be totally wrong, that an hour had gone, that, okay, they're not that worried. They've not called me back. And and then, the week later I got called into the GP who said, "You got really long lungs." And by the way, there's nothing there.
Nothing there? And what was it, just in your head? Or was
it was all in my head. Yeah. It was all in my head. But there had been this period of about, I'd say, a week where I was just doing the maths.
High school maths?
High school maths. And it was I don't know if she realizes that it was a sort of a saving grace in the sense that it took my mind off this thing that doesn't exist. I mean, I've never experienced it before, and I've not experienced it since this, where you can't get it out of your head. So now when somebody says to me, they feel something, I believe them. I don't.
You tell them to go do some high school maths.
Yes, I will do. Yeah.
One question about that though. You were telling me you didn't do complex numbers at high school.
No,
what was it like for you going back years and years and years later, looking at what high school students are learning now?
Actually, I was pleasantly surprised about the maths course, and in particular what's called the further maths course. The maths course does do complex numbers now, and the further maths course does some really quite neat stuff, matrices and eigenvalues, and a lot more detail of complex numbers. They do a lot of de Moivre theorem, really dealing with some fairly detailed calculations, and in fact they actually do differential equations, and it's much better than the maths course I did. I mean, I did okay in the maths. It turned out my A-levels, I was clearly reasonably good, and they put me forward for an extra exam called an S-level, which at the time was beyond A-level, and very few people took it. And it's one of these exams where I couldn't answer a single question completely, but I got an A from it because I'd clearly... I mean, I loved that paper. Even though I knew I couldn't answer, the challenging of trying to do angle formulas and things was there. But there was no complex numbers in it because I didn't even know they existed. It was really strange.
Well, do they exist? They're imaginary.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Where the hell are they?
One more question. You've written lots of great papers and won medals and worked with amazing people and amazing friendships. Would you swap all of that success and that career to be a Test cricketer for England?
Yeah, to be a Test cricketer, yeah. Not particularly a footballer, but a Test cricketer.
Yeah. You'd swap it.
To be at the MCC, to be MCG, Melbourne.
Yeah, play at the MCG. You don't want to play at the MCG with 100,000 Australians paying for your blood.
And smack them all around the ground. I mean, one of the great memories I've got of is it the centenary test? Are you old enough to remember the centenary?
I was only one when it happened, but I'm very familiar with it. Test cricket is like international cricket played between the countries, and the first ever match was between Australia and England in 1877, and then they played another test match, a special match in 1977 called the Centenary Test.
That was a game and a half, and of course it was in Australia,
and Australia won by 45 runs, the exact same margin as the first test.
You had no need for that. No need for that. But I was under the blankets. I mean, it was night time for me.
Yeah.
And they were broadcasting on the radio. And the thing I remember was Derek Randall. I mean, if you go on Derek Randall, who's Nottinghamshire, and I met Derek Randall.
He was a batsman for England.
He was, and a super fielder, super fielder. And I met him at John Lewis, the local store. He was buying a coffee, and I went up to, and he had a great game. He got 100 plus. And it was that innings that I thought, I would love to have done that innings. And I went up to him, actually. It was just about 4 years ago. I just saw him there, and I thought, I've got to go and say thank you. I mean, what else can I do? So I did. I went up and said, thank you so much for everything, and in particular that centenary test. And he was really bowled over that.
Yeah?
Because people, you reach a stage and people forget. And yeah, it was great to.
You didn't even pause when I asked you if you'd swap your career to be a test cricketer. You said yes before I finished the question.
Cricket, I love cricket.
It's a good game.
It's a good game. It's an absolute cracker of a game.
That's all today. Thanks to Ed Copeland for sharing his time, and thanks to Jane Street for sponsoring this episode. More links to Ed's work and his long list of videos we've made together will be in all the usual places. I'm Brady Harron, and you've been listening to the Numberphile podcast.